So that's a nice story, but is it right? Well, it's difficult to know. First of all, Darwinian evolution is an extremely flexible theory. It can predict virtually any outcome, and it's easy to come up with explanatory stories that sound evolutionarily sensical after the fact. The only things that seem directly to follow from evolution is that we shouldn't have a gene to kill ourselves, and we shouldn't have a gene which prohibits reproduction directly. This leaves a huge ground. In fact, essentially every single psychological phenomenon in psychology for which we really can't be overly confident in has evolutionary explanations. It is important to remember that survival is a complex and interactive thing, that it's highly dependent on specific contexts. For example, what if a liking for fertile women was also highly correlated with fatal fights at a young age? This explanation would suggest that a preference for fertile women should, from a Darwinian point of view, not be passed on. It is equally as logical from an evolutionary standpoint, but it doesn't seem to be accurate. If we focus more strictly on the contention that the differences are biological, the case seems more easy to swallow whole. Evidence that something is consistent across cultures is a necessary prerequisite for something being universally biologically shared. Although, of course, it is not sufficient, there are other reasons why a thing can be universally shared. Social roles theory. Men historically tend to have the dominant social status in society, and as a result of this power discrepancy, men and women developed different preferences for partners. The other camp, led primarily by Alice Eagly, proposes that the differences have no genetic basis, but rather are mostly the result of the different social roles that have been adopted by men and women. In other words, because of whatever reason in most societies the power structure exists that women are generally of lower status than men, the men generally work while the women are dependent on them, and the women take care of the children. And that it follows naturally from this power structure that women would desire men who can protect them, because they're dependent on them within that society's power structure. It perhaps less clearly follows that men should be more interested in physical appearance, maybe because they have the luxury to worry primarily about appearance, since they are not dependent. At any rate, a key aspect of social roles theories is they posit that the differences between men and women are not biological. If the power structure of society changes, that, in time, the psychological partner preferences of men and women should change too. This is in contrast to evolutionary, or as I prefer to call it, the biological view, which suggests that because such differences are genetic, they should remain despite differing environmental input. Eagly, in 1998, accounted for gender equity across society and found that this reduced the size of the gender effect for 2 of 3 key variables. Recent evidence presented by Alice Eagly suggests that for certain traits, social roles may account for some of the partner differences between men and women. Specifically, she reanalyzed David Buss's cross-cultural study in a clever way. She factored into the equation a measure of gender equality across all the countries. Social roles theory would predict that gender differences in partner preference would be less in societies where men and women were more on equal footing. But in societies where men still had tops in the power structure, the differences would be more evident. Generally, the results supported this conclusion for 2 of the 3 variables they looked at. However, preference for physically attractive person was not one of them. Men still preferred physically attractive women the same whether they were highly gender equitable countries or not. Thus, the evidence from these reanalyses was mixed. So what do we make of the debate between the evolutionary and social role camps? First, throwing aside that the more questionable evolutionary explanation and focusing on the more easily demonstrable biological one, the cross-cultural evidence does seem to suggest some biological difference. Even if social roles do, as suggested by Alice Eagly's analysis, impact sex differences, Social roles theory still leaves us with the question, okay, so why has virtually every society that has ever existed, including every society around today, had a power and structure in place that favors men over women? Surely this fact is not due to entirely random chance. Social roles theory is moot on the subject. Indeed, it is worth pointing out that biological and social roles approaches are not mutually exclusive. They are perfectly compatible. It may well be, as some have argued, that social roles mediate between biological tendencies and actual psychological preferences. In other words, it might be that biological tendency gives rise to social roles, which in turn impact biological preferences. This would suggest that changing social roles would be difficult, but to the degree that it could be accomplished, it could in fact alleviate some of the partner preferences. The interaction between the characteristics of two people. How do their specific traits match, and how does this influence liking? Okay, enough yammering on about gender differences between persons. So we've talked a little bit about what types of people are attractive, and about one characteristic of people that influences what they find attractive, gender. Now let's take a different tact altogether. Let's ask the question, does the combination of particular types of people lead to more attraction? To what degree does the way the characteristics of people match up influence the degree of attraction? Consider these two sayings from folk wisdom. Birds of a feather flock together. But what about opposites attract? These sayings' directions contradict one another. One implies that people are attracted to those they find similar, and the other implies that people are attracted to those they find dissimilar. The logic of the birds of a feather flock together is that we like people with which we can share our experiences. The logic of the other is that we like people who are different and unique from us, maybe because we find them more interesting since they're not like us. Similarity hypothesis. People are attracted to others who are similar to them. The available evidence definitely favors the similarity hypothesis. People spend more time with persons who share their demographic characteristics. Practically any demographic characteristic, such as age, education level, religion, physical health you can think of, has a study which suggests that in fact, people spend more time with persons who are similar on that characteristic. Of course, this could mean that people simply converge towards their partner, etc., after they spend time with them, rather than merely initially attracted to similar others in the first place. But an experimental study in a dormitory, which was able to get such information before the persons interacted, suggested otherwise. Persons actually liked and chose to spend time with similar others. Similarly, lots of research suggests that people are attracted more to other people who hold similar attitudes. Research supports the notion that people like those with similar attitudes more than those without similar attitudes. The course that this takes varies depending on whether attitudes are considered as perceived attitudes, what I think other people believe, or actual attitudes, what they actually believe. In the Newcomb dorm study, for example, initially and consistently, perceived attitude similarity was the most important predictor of attraction. The importance of actual attitude similarity increased as the study went on, due presumably to the fact that persons needed time to learn what others actually believed. The take-home message from both conceptualizations is the same. However, persons prefer those who, they believe, have similar attitudes as themselves. There have been some people who have taken issue with the importance of attitude similarity, however. Milton Rosenbaum argues that it is not so much similarity that's important, but rather dissimilarity that is the important factor in attraction. I won't go into the details, but Rosenbaum has found some results that generally look like this. Rosenbaum offers up the interpersonal repulsion hypothesis. That is, we assume similarity with other people, but when we see dissimilarity, we notice it and repulse by it. Thus, similarity doesn't really increase attraction per se, but if a certain level of similarity isn't met, if someone is really dissimilar, then we're repulsed by them. The factors that increase attraction, given that we are not repulsed by them, may have little to do with similarity. Some have taken issue with this interpretation. Brin et al., for example, proposed a two-stage model whereby initially people use dissimilarity to rule out those that are completely dissimilar, and then use similarity to pick from the rest.